welcome to another episode of Let's Talk ASPM, where we talk about all the things application security posture management. And today I'm thrilled to host Paolo Del Mundo, who is Director of Application Security at Motley. Paolo, welcome to the show.
Hey, Raj, thanks for having me.
Yes, Paolo, it was my pleasure to meet you in person a few weeks back. And I found your journey very interesting, journey to being a software engineer to being a leader in application security. I think those are two functions that really need to come together for organizations to deliver secure software, right? So I'd like to understand why the journey that you made, why you made the journey, and understand the challenges really about delivering secure software, what the challenges organizations face in maturing their application security, and what best practices you have found in basically maturing that program, right? So that's what we'll be covering here. I'm looking forward to this.
Great.
All right, Paolo. So looking at your background, right, I see that you were a software engineer and an engineering manager, and now you are a director of application security at Motley. So can you tell me a little bit about your background on how this journey happened and why you ended up where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I had a long history in software engineering. I did pretty much 15 years of software engineering before I decided, you know what, I'd really like to specialize in security, right? And essentially, out of all the things that I've done in that 15 years time span, security was the most interesting aspect, right? I really like getting into the nuts and bolts of like why an attacker is able to I was thinking, I could be a generalist, I could be a specialist, but it feels like it would be more fun if I would specialize in security. And that's essentially the path I went down on. And so when I had a chance, when I was looking for a new job, I was lucky to meet or to reconnect with my old colleagues at the Motley, right? Because they had the same exact need. They were looking for a security specialist who would help them with their application security journey, right? Because they were starting off that path. And it so happened that, the stars aligned. So I took the job. I didn't know, after 15 years, you don't, like, you think like, is this even like possible, right? Can I just like change my, career trajectory, even if I technically didn't do any security, in depth at that point. And so I just took the job, and it's really worked out really well.
That's very interesting. So it's great to see that even when you were a software engineer, you saw the need for having secure code. You believed in the security aspect of developing software, right? I wouldn't say that he's something that he's common. Unfortunately, what happens is when the software comes out, I think because of the business pressures, the priority to ship it faster takes priority over shipping it securely, right? That's how we have. And in my previous chats, we had talked about software probably is the only field where security is not always baked in, right? When we talk about building planes, software is baked in. When we are building homes, security is baked in. We can't think of putting in security in a plane after it starts flying, right? It's very interesting to see that you saw the need even when you were a software engineer here. So in your journey as a software engineer and now as application security leader, what are the challenges that you see in maturing an application security program?
Well, like you said, right, there's a natural tendency for teams to prioritize features instead of security, right? And so it's essentially an application security team's job to figure out how they can scale security, through an organization, right? In our case, we started off with identifying vulnerabilities for our software teams. And that worked for a while, and then it did, right?
Mm.
Because what ended up happening was, when you first start off and put 𝗙liche or, 𝗻𝗁xe or any of these solutions into your environment, at first it's great because you're finding things that you've never found before. And then teams start to like creep, their backlog tends to creep up, and suddenly they have like tons of things. And at some point they're gonna cry uncle and say, we can't do this, which, it's just impossible to keep up with, all the things that you need to do in that in your environment. So I would say that the number one challenge that we as a security organization face, as well as other security organizations face, is, this whole cycle of like find, um, trade tickets for, chase down teams. Like that is a very difficult cycle to win, right? And I think that's why a lot of the calls for shift left have happened, because teams have found that like it's not a very viable remediation process, right? And
Right.
that's what, shift left is all about, like finding things earlier so that you don't even have to go into that whole cycle. So that is one of the things that, every team has faced. And, I think we're still like trying to figure out the best ways around it.
Right, right. Yeah, totally. I think you hit the nail on its head. So that's been my experience too, talking to teams, that there is uh, a desire to put security from the beginning, when the design itself happens. And so that eventually when the scanners come in, you don't have to deal with a deluge of security vulnerabilities that come along with it. So what are the challenges that you have faced in implementing or in shifting to the left?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is just understanding context in your organization, right? Because not every asset's the same, right? You might have, a database that might be public, but if it doesn't contain anything, sensitive, then it might not be as critical as something that does, right? So just
Mhm.
like understanding, like this is half the battle, right? It's easy enough to like have 𝗻𝗁xe or any of these tools scan your environment and tell you what's going on. But the context is another important aspect that these tools can't automate, right? And so understanding, oh, this is like the critical stuff that really will get us in trouble. It's important to understand that, because your teams should really be starting on those rather than just a general like, fix everything, because that's not going to work.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So now talking about, like you mentioned a couple of scanners, you talked about 𝗙𝗎, you talked about 𝗙liche. They obviously have a lot of findings and vulnerabilities that they surface. And according to one of the discussions that I was having, apparently in their environment, 70% of the vulnerabilities that were coming out, or findings that were coming out, were either high or critical, right? So when such a high percentage is high and critical, then nothing is critical, right?
Yeah.
And then you talked about layering in some kind of additional context about the asset itself, if it's worth uh, protecting the way, or in a priority list at least, right? Is it high on the totem pole or low on the totem pole? So how do you, so what are the criteria, other criteria that you use? And how do you, I'm assuming you're automating some parts of it, right? Because you probably have a lot of assets, a lot of vulnerabilities. If you can walk me through how you do that.
Yeah. So, part of it is like the business criticality, right? Are we storing data that is critical to our business? Does it contain any secret sauce that you don't want your competitors to find out, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important aspect of determining whether something is relevant. The other aspect is compliance, right? What are the rules that we need to comply by?
Mhm.
Is this GDPR related? Is this CCP related? Is this PCI related? And from that, right, that gives us a very good idea of like how important it is in that totem pole.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why we use ArmorCode, right? Because we need a system that can track that relevancy of that, of those assets, right? And, it's the one place that all our tools flow into, provides us that context, and then we can, give that, handful of vulnerabilities to teams that really need to be fixed.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. So you're talking about basically what can be a very difficult task of trying to find a needle in a haystack. You're using a platform like ArmorCode to basically funnel in all the outputs of scanners like Snake, Wiz, and other scanners that you might be having to find out what really is important. And based on what you mentioned, I'm assuming you're configuring the platform to customize it to surface the problems that are important to you, right? Like the assets that are important to you. Maybe there are some compliance requirements that are important to you. And also maybe something might be having a very important uh, information in it. It may not be internet facing, right? So maybe it becomes a lower priority in terms of securing it. Or maybe there is some vulnerability that you have that you're aware of it. Maybe you put some compensatory mechanisms around it because you need that piece of code for your functionality to work. So in terms of your interactions with the software development team now, right? So that's the world that you came in. One of the things that's a hot button issue is the friction there is between interactions between the AppSec engineers and the developers, right? So can you tell me a little bit about coming from the development world that you came from and the world that you are in? What's the source of that friction and how you think those frictions can be reduced?
Yeah, I mean, I think the source of friction is partly developers might not completely understand why something is important, right? As a security professional, I see, these exploits happening day in and day out, and it makes an opinion. It makes a I realize like it's not such a theoretical thing. It can actually take over your company. You can lose money from this, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm very attuned to like, oh, we have this vulnerability, we probably should fix it. Developers don't see that, right? They see like, oh, maybe once in 1,000, this actually happens, right? Like, why do I need to stop my work that is, impacting the bottom line when, this is not that, um, you know, possible, right? It might not even happen. So, I think part of it is just education, right? Like, trying to show them like, this happened in this company, this happened to Okta or Cloudflare or whatever, and it could happen to us. And therefore, this is why I think it's important. But I think part of the reason too why there's that friction is because like, and we've been guilty of this as well, right? Is that we would send vulnerabilities that may or may, that shouldn't really be prioritized at that level, right? Like I said, like like you said, if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority, right?
Yeah.
And teams get like inundated with stuff. They tune out, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's a very bad thing to do as well.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, right, that developers and teams are tuning out. It made me realize we have to change our strategy here because I don't want them to shut down and not do anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
So our strategy is kind of changing, and we're moving more towards like a shared model, right? Where every month we meet with teams, we try to understand their business, their use cases. In some cases, we try to help them speed up their features if we can, right? So for example, one team we just spoke to wanted to automate the patching process, right? Which is a win-win, right? It's a win for us, it's a win for them.
Yeah.
And if they can identify a patch that won't affect their system then they just want it to automatically happen. And we're so here for that, right? And those are the kind of wins that we have to find, across teams. And
Right.
that
Yeah.
really happens when you have that relationship with the team.
Exactly. Yeah, very important. Building that mutually trusting relationship, right? Maybe find out what are win-wins and go after those once a year. So in terms of you talked about one identifying one, they're not understanding the implication of a particular threat. There's no shared understanding of this particular vulnerability. Does it really represent the threat? And then you talked about using real world examples to make a point that this was actually exploited in this, and this is the headline that came out of it, or this is the business impact that came out of it. Would you really like to have something like that on your hand? So that's one point you mentioned. And the other one you talked about coming up with the instead of going to them with a list of 1,000 problems that they should be fixing, going with really maybe these are the 50 that really that you need to fix. So can you tell me how you maybe use ArmorCode platform or other people and process things that you have put in place to go from a list of 1,000 to 50, developers will pay attention to?
Yeah. So all our point solutions feed into ArmorCode. And in ArmorCode, we provide context through the things that I specified earlier, like business criticality, compliance criticality, and all that, right? So
Yeah.
at that point, we have the base CVSS scores in some cases, the relevancy of this asset to our business. And then we mix that with other factors like the EPSS score, right? Which is telling us like how likely something is to be exploited in the wild, or a 𝗙𝗵𝗪 score, right?
Yeah.
And based on all that, right, we boil it down, and ArmorCode is great at this because there's like this one field called the risk score, right? Which tells us, you can prioritize it based on that says these are the top assets based on your business criticality, based on the base CVSS score, and based on other factors, that this is the thing that you should prioritize first. And that's
Right.
the list that we work on first with our teams.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you for shedding a bit of light on that one. All right. Yeah, Paulo, thank you so much. So we talked about how basically to take a bunch of vulnerabilities and findings that are coming in, and then basically put a technical severity to that, and also the business severity to a particular problem, and give a shorter list of high risk problems that the developers can fix. So one of the things that's happening in the industry now is how do we communicate risk to the business, right? So many businesses don't understand the risk, either because it's not explained to them properly, or because it's explained to them in a very technology terms, right? So do you have, can you share your experience about how you communicate risk to the business so that the necessary investments that need to be made in a security program happens?
Yeah. So the wrong way to do it is to talk about CVSS, right? No board really cares about that, right?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, we've made that mistake as well. But
Yeah.
I think the right way to talk about it is to talk about dollar values, right?
Mm.
So let's say we have this product, right, that is very important to our organization, and there is, I don't know, if you can quantify the risk in terms of like how much dollars can you lose if something went wrong, then that's a very clear indication to the board that more work needs to be done fixing the vulnerabilities for this project, right? So
Right.
I like to bring it at the end of the day down to dollars and cents, and show them that there is a very large possibility that that A, you can be breached, or B, that compliance organizations might find you liable for not meeting certain requirements.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So I think that's the right way to put it, right? So understanding in a way that the business leaders care about. maybe there's a downtime that comes from being breached, or maybe there is a fine that comes from being breached, or there's a fine that comes from being in violation of a particular compliance, right? So let me ask you this question now. So in terms of, I know there's a lot changing in technology world, right? There is a change in the way the software is delivered, right? What used to be delivered once in maybe 6 months, 3 months is actually getting progressively faster. And the infrastructure on which it's delivered is also changing to more cloud containers and things like that. And then we have AI coming in, Gen AI, right? There's a call to adopt more of those things. So how do you keep yourself up to speed with everything that's happening in the technology field, and how to secure them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's a very evergreen question for everyone in technology. I think at the end of the day, you just have to love it, right? You just have to love learning and be okay with drinking from the fire hose, right?
Yeah.
There's so many sources of information. I particularly like YouTube. I get a lot of value from that, but I also like books, podcasts, right? What have you. And, over time, you just know what you like to consume, right? And so that's essentially what I do. I just have various sources of information that I like to consume and, do it because I like it.
All right, awesome, very good. Yeah, so can you share some, for our audience, can you share some specific sources, maybe on YouTube or podcast, your go-to sources, or a book, right, that you would recommend?
Yeah, so right now I'm actually reading this book. I think it's called Sooner, Happier, something. I forget. It's the actual title, but it's a really good book about delivering value to an organization. It's not even security related, but Sooner, Happier, and something. I forget. Anyway,
That's fine.
yeah,
We'll find out. Yeah.
yeah. And it's important because, like, even from a security lens, you need to know what value is to a business, and how to work within an organization, right? Security is a very technical field, but again, it's also just a people field, right? Knowing
Yeah.
why businesses prioritize certain things over other things, to be successful in security and in other fields, you have to sort of know that already, right?
Yeah.
So I really like that book from that perspective. Podcasts, I mean, what have you, there's tons of AI podcasts. I like the 𝗙cie series. I really
Yeah.
like that series of podcasts.
Yeah, the very interesting one. A lot of great conversations on that for sure.
Yeah.
So, Paulo, thank you for sharing that perspective about how to reduce friction between developers and the security teams, right? So, can you give some specific examples of what you do to make it easier for developers to work with the security teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to start a security program today, I would think about how I can embed security into their workflows so that they don't even have to think about, security at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can we embed static checks in their pipeline so that, it would tell them before they commit, code to master that, you have a problem here, right? And you can't proceed until we fix it. And here's why, right? It might take the form of, automatically merging, uh, you know, version bumps that wouldn't really break the build, right?
Mm.
So security can happen automatically without developers having to think like, oh, did I do this? Then that's a win for everyone, right? That's a win for the developers because they can be assured that security is there, from the start. And it's a win for us because we don't have to report it. We don't have to go through that whole remediation process and tell people like, hey, did you patch your stuff, right? And then just
Yeah.
finding other ways to have that, like, it's this concept of paved roads, right?
Right.
So this concept originated from Netflix, and I've heard of it, in other podcasts as well. But the idea is that, like, can we define exactly what a good software implementation looks like, right? And that might take the form of like approved libraries, right? It might take the form of, best practices in launching your, AWS, right? Like if you use these tools, then you're almost assured that what you deploy to AWS won't have those critical vulnerabilities, right? And so if you constrain or at least explain to developers like why it's important to use this paved path, then they don't almost have to be an expert in security, right? They can just know that if I am using this, then I should be assured that that we won't have problems down the road.
Yeah, that's very good. So, I mean, you're talking about putting paved road, putting guardrails, right? So that way, when they are within that particular space, they know that as long as they operate within that space, I mean, like the security is there by default or by design.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And the whole concept is that by giving them this paved path, they know they can move faster.
Exactly. Yeah, fantastic.
They don't have to worry about like, oh, did I make this mistake or whatever. I can deploy as fast as I can as long as I'm on that paved road.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I love this because developers have that need for speed, right? If you take that fear from their mind, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing something wrong? All the time, you say, stay within this, you're good to go as fast as you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. And I'm assuming that particular set of guardrails that you put needs to be continuously looked at and reviewed because technology, for example, all of a sudden Gen AI comes, they change how they code, and you now need to change how that particular thing needs to be, a guardrail needs to be put around that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the technology is forever changing. There will be vulnerabilities that are found, but luckily you can easily fix that paved road and hopefully, still have a secure environment after that.
So let me ask you this last question. So now I talked about, I got to know Paolo has a security professional, right? So tell me what makes Paolo, meaning outside of security. I mean, what's your hobby? What keeps you, what brings you alive in terms of any hobbies that you have? How you spend your free time?
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't expect that, but I was a pretty good chess player back in the day. So I mean, that's sort of my
Yes.
hobby now. And I have an 8-year-old son that loves chess as well. So I'm helping him, go to tournaments, learning how to play chess and come up with strategies and whatnot. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
fantastic.
it's been a good experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm like some of these kids I know. Oh my goodness, they're so young but so good. They have beaten me in a couple of moves. That's it. They have a couple of strategies and they open it up with a move. I don't foresee what they're thinking, and within a matter of 3 to 4 moves, the game is done.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're getting
Yes.
younger and younger, right? I mean, you have grandmasters at what, age 12 now? It's
Yes.
back in my day, right? Like Bobby Fischer was a grandmaster by 16, which
Right.
was amazing back then, and now
Right.
it's shortened to like 4 years by 4 years.
Right.
So,
Right. So does that mean that you drive your kid around a lot to different competitions on this chess?
well, right now it's been local, right? But
Mm.
eventually, if he does take it seriously, then yes, we would probably go to more national events.
All right, awesome. Yeah, this reminds me of the earlier days when my daughter was younger. And like I used to drive around, take her to different chess competitions, and I was just astounded at the level of skill that these small kids have at such a young age. So I look forward to hearing. I mean, they're staying in touch with you and figuring out how your son does, right, on these trips that we have.
Yeah, he
So,
has a tournament
Paul,
this weekend, so I'm gonna let you know.
oh, very cool, very cool. Yeah. So, Paulo, thank you so much. I look forward to one sharing this with the world and also meeting you in person again to continue the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Raj.